I always thought my family was normal. Maybe a little distant, sure, but nothing out of the ordinary. We had our regular Sunday dinners, birthday parties, and those awkward holiday reunions where everyone just pretends to get along. But all of that changed when my grandpa passed away. His last wish uncovered a secret that completely shattered everything I thought I knew about my family and about myself. It all started about 6 months ago. Grandpa's health took a turn for the worse. He'd always been the strong, quiet type, a man of few words but with an unshakable presence. Even in his 80s, he was sharp, witty, and as stubborn as they come. When he got sick, the whole family rallied around him. Or at least, that's how it looked from the outside. In reality, my family was already cracking at the seams. My dad, my Uncle Rick, and my Aunt Susan hadn't agreed on a single thing in years. They fought over money, over land, and over ancient grudges so old that nobody even remembered how they started. Grandpa did his best to keep the peace, but the bitterness just ran too deep. When the doctors told us he didn't have much time left, we all knew what was coming. The reading of his will was going to be an absolute circus. But nobody, and I mean nobody, could have predicted the bombshell he was about to drop before he died. I visited him a lot during his last few weeks. Unlike my dad or my aunt, I actually cared about Grandpa for who he was, not what he owned. We'd sit and talk for hours about his life, his youth, and regrets he'd never shared with anyone else. But there was one conversation that I'll never forget. It was late one evening. The light from his bedside lamp cast these long, dancing shadows across the room. He looked at me with these tired, heavy eyes and said, "Daniel, there's something I need you to promise me." "Of course, Grandpa," I said, leaning in closer to hear him. "When I'm gone," he whispered, "make sure everyone is there for the will reading. Every single one of them. Especially your father." I frowned. "Okay, but why?" "You know what they're like when money is involved." He managed a faint smile. "Because it's not about the money this time. It's about the truth." That was the last real conversation we ever had. He passed away peacefully just 3 days later. The funeral was emotional, but incredibly tense. Everyone showed up. My dad, his siblings, my cousins, even distant relatives we hadn't seen in years. Afterwards, the lawyer, Mr. Harrison, announced that Grandpa's will would be read the following week at his old farmhouse, the one he'd built with his own hands 50 years ago. When the day finally arrived, the air inside that house felt heavy, thick with unspoken words. It smelled of dust and old memories. Mr. Harrison sat at the head of the big dining table, surrounded by thick folders of paperwork. My dad sat to his left, arms crossed over his chest like a shield. Aunt Susan was clutching her handbag so tightly it looked like a weapon, and Uncle Rick just kept pacing anxiously by the window. I found a quiet spot in the corner and just watched it all unfold. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. "Before I begin," he announced, "Mr. Miller, your grandfather, requested that I play a video recording first. It was made just 2 weeks before his passing." Everyone exchanged confused glances. He pressed a button on a small player, and the screen flickered to life. And there he was. Grandpa, sitting in his favorite armchair, looking weak but with that familiar fire still in his eyes. His voice, raspy but firm, filled the room. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone. And if you're all here together, it means I've finally done something none of you could. Brought this family together one last time. I know there's been anger, resentment, and greed between you. But before we get to who gets what, there's something you all need to hear. Something I've kept hidden for far too long." Everyone in the room leaned forward. Even my dad looked pale. Grandpa continued, his voice steady. "This family has been built on a foundation of lies, and it's time those lies die with me." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the old wooden floor. 45 years ago, he said, his gaze fixed on the camera, "your mother and I adopted a baby boy. We never told anyone, not even him. We raised him as our own because his real parents couldn't. One of you is not who you think you are." Aunt Susan gasped. "What in the world does that mean?" Grandpa's voice went on, ignoring the interruption. "I loved all of you the same. But one of you was born to another man. A man who was very, very close to this family. The video ended abruptly, leaving his words hanging in the silent, stunned air. The lawyer paused, clearly uncomfortable with the drama unfolding. Mr. Miller left behind documentation and letters that confirm this statement, he said cautiously. But he did not specify who the adopted child is. He said the answer lies in a sealed envelope, to be opened only after the will has been read. Chaos erupted. Everyone started talking at once. Aunt Susan shouted, "This is ridiculous. He must have been confused in his final days." Uncle Rick snapped back, "What if it's you, Susan? You were always the favorite." My dad slammed his hand on the table, and the room shook. "Enough!" And me? I just sat there, frozen. Grandpa had never, ever hinted at anything like this. Mr. Harrison continued reading the will. For the most part, it was straightforward. The farmhouse went to my dad. The lake cabin went to Aunt Susan. The business property went to Uncle Rick. But then came the twist. To my grandchild, Daniel. That's me. I leave a box stored in my study. Inside is something that belongs only to you. You will understand when you open it. Every head in the room turned to look at me. I could feel their eyes on me. My father's face tightened into a hard knot. After the reading was over, I went upstairs to Grandpa's study. The box was there, just as he said. It was old and wooden, with my name, Daniel, carved into the top. I lifted the lid. Inside were a few old letters, some black and white photographs, and a folded sealed envelope marked, "For Daniel, when the truth comes out." I didn't open it right away. My hands were shaking too much. Downstairs, my family was still shouting, still arguing about the adoption revelation. My dad was accusing the lawyer of making it up. Aunt Susan was crying, insisting she couldn't be adopted because she looked just like Grandma. It was absolute madness. I quietly slipped out of the room, got in my car, and drove home. That night, alone in my apartment, I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a birth certificate. My heart felt like it stopped beating when I saw the name on it. It was mine. But under Mother, it didn't list Grandma's name. And under Father, it wasn't Grandpa's. It listed Uncle Rick, and a woman I'd never heard of named Carol Bennett. I couldn't breathe. Uncle Rick, my uncle, was my biological father. I read it again and again, just hoping, praying I was misreading it. But the document was official. It was real. Grandpa had known this the entire time. Tucked underneath it was another note, handwritten by Grandpa himself. It said, "Daniel, when your mother died, Rick wasn't ready to raise a child. He was young, reckless, and scared. So I stepped in. I couldn't let my grandson grow up without a family. Please forgive me for keeping this from you. I only ever wanted to protect everyone." Tears started streaming down my face. I wasn't angry at Grandpa. I understood why he did it. But I felt so betrayed by everyone else. The next morning, I drove back to the farmhouse. They were all still there, still pointing fingers, trying to figure out who the adopted one was. I walked straight up to Uncle Rick and just handed him the paper. He went completely pale. His hands trembled as he read it. Dad looked over. "What is that?" Rick's voice was a whisper. It's Daniel's birth certificate." Aunt Susan snatched it from his hand and read it out loud. The room fell completely, utterly silent. My dad's face turned a deep shade of red. "You knew about this?" he shouted at Rick. Rick's voice cracked. "No, I didn't. I swear. I thought the baby died after the birth. Carol left town and—" He just stopped himself. I glared at him, the anger rising in my chest. "You didn't even look for me?" For a moment, nobody spoke. It was the most heartbreaking silence I had ever experienced. Finally, Aunt Susan muttered, "So that's what Dad meant. It wasn't one of us. It was Daniel." Everyone just looked at me like I was a complete stranger. I didn't know how to feel. Grateful that Grandpa loved me enough to raise me, or furious that he'd lied to me for my entire life. That night, I stayed at the farmhouse by myself. I found myself sitting in Grandpa's old armchair, staring at the empty screen where his video had played. I whispered into the quiet room, "Why didn't you just tell me sooner?" And for the first time in my adult life, I cried like a child. Over the next few weeks, the family completely fell apart. My dad and Uncle Rick stopped speaking to each other. Aunt Susan told the entire extended family, and soon, everyone knew. Some people started treating me differently, like I didn't belong anymore. But then, something unexpected happened. Uncle Rick, my biological father, he started reaching out. He'd send messages, trying to reconnect. At first, I ignored them. But eventually, a mix of curiosity and maybe a little bit of compassion got the better of me. We met at a small, quiet diner one afternoon. He looked nervous and somehow older. He said, "Daniel, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I would like a chance to know my son before it's too late." I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him. Then I said, "You already lost 26 years. Don't waste the next 26 pretending it's too late." He smiled, a weak but genuine smile. And that was the beginning of something new. We started talking more, slowly and carefully rebuilding something that should have been there all along. Meanwhile, my relationship with the man who raised me shifted, but it didn't break. I still called him Dad, because no matter what a piece of paper said, he was my father. A few months later, I went to visit Grandpa's grave. I placed the letter he'd written to me on the grass and whispered, "I forgive you." I realized then that Grandpa hadn't just left me a secret. He had left me a choice. I could let this revelation destroy me, or I could use it to heal generations of brokenness in our family. I chose to heal. Now, every year on Grandpa's birthday, we all go back to the farmhouse, me, Dad, and Rick. It's still awkward sometimes, but it's progress. Grandpa's last wish wasn't just about revealing a secret. It was about setting us all free from the lies that had kept us apart for so long. He once told me, "Family isn't about blood, Daniel. It's about who stands beside you when the truth comes out." And now, after all this, I finally understand what he meant. Thanks for listening to my story. It's been a crazy journey, but it's taught me so much. If you have a story about family secrets, I'd love to read it in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories. See you next time.